Good morning, everybody. You might not be clapping at the end of this. I don't have a video. I wish we had a video. Mr. Gandra didn't give us the budget for that. So, where this talk is going, and I'm trying to do this in the time allotted to us, we have 16 slides. And so I hope you are all speed readers because some of these slides are very dense. I think Mark Twain said, he wrote to somebody once and said, "I'm sorry, this is a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one," which is true. It's all in the editing, isn't it, in the presentation? Never mind. So this is what I want to talk about, the task that we've got as Fiscal Review Committee and where we're at, what we're learning, and what we're thinking. And I want to share with everybody what we're thinking because for all the reasons, and the Minister said it today, nothing that we should be doing is secret. We want to share our views now. We're only recommending, we don't actually decide, but we want to give the best possible advice to the government, and so we do want feedback based on what we are thinking, even if we have not reached final views. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about how we perhaps can turn all of this talk into action. So this is the task that we were given, our terms of reference. I should say that there are 14 of us, really interesting and good group, very conscientious, very hardworking, very committed, spending a lot of time that often they don't have, just up, and working very well together. But these are our terms of reference, and in terms of where we're at, I think on the first one, optimizing tax and the customs, we're with the help of FIRCA, we have good information. We're making good progress on that. Removing regulatory impediments to economic growth, that also, we are making reasonable progress on that. Non-tax revenues, we need more information, and that's challenging. Reducing public sector costs and better managing and ensuring value for money. That's also challenging from the viewpoint of information. But the World Bank PER, Public Expenditure Report, is very helpful to us there, and I will be referring to that as we go. Ensuring better investment appraisal and project selection. We have a draft National Infrastructure Investment Plan, which is helpful, but again, information is difficult to come by in an organized way. And finally, ensuring recommended policies ensure that we don't disadvantage or we don't hurt our most disadvantaged citizens. I think as the PS said, it's one thing to consolidate fiscally. It's another thing to be able to cut your spending or manage your spending in an efficient way. Take, for example, economic growth is good for everybody. It lifts all boats, as they say. But when you're trying to cut government expenditure and at the same time promote economic growth, I'm going to come back to the Department of Environment, for example, which is the source of a lot of complaint from private sector investors. And yet, over the last 4 years, its budget has been cut from $10 million to $3 million, just as demand for its work, increases. So it's got real resource constraints, as a result. Okay, so progress. We've had more than 120 written submissions, 3 days of public consultations, mixed turnouts. Nobody in Bar turned up, but we got good numbers in Lautoka, in Suva. No clear trends really emerging from that, but there are some business complaints, and we'll come back to that. Some participants have expressed frustration at the lack of available information in the public space, because they're saying, how can we contribute when you don't give us the information to help you? And I think there's an important learning point to be taken from that. We've had about 40 meetings with government departments, regulators, multilateral agencies, state-owned enterprises. So that's what we're doing. Let's talk a little bit about what we're learning, and now the slides start to get a bit dense. Governments simply underfunded. And let's look back and see how we used to collect revenue. VAT used to be 15%. We've all forgotten that. Corporate tax used to be 28%. The income tax threshold used to be 16,000. We took a whole lot of growth gambles by reducing the tax take and all against increasing government spending. And in essence, that gamble, in our view, has not paid off. Generally, we think the quality of government spending has been poor and possibly politically driven. We're going to talk a little bit about asset management, maintenance, measuring and reporting. Obviously, those rising debt to GDP levels before COVID were evident. They already signaled our vulnerability, and there were then opposition politicians, like the current minister, like Mr. Narumbe, who were sounding warning bells about that. Then, of course, came COVID, and this is what the World Bank told us. The COVID-driven economic contraction, Fiji suffered the 4th highest global contraction in the world. Afghanistan first, Lebanon second, Palau, I think, third because of tourism, and then us. So that indicates how vulnerable we were and possibly still are. And this is the other thing that they've told us, that the current fiscal consolidation measures that we are taking will not decrease the debt to GDP ratio. If we simply continue as we are, actually debt to GDP on the World Bank's numbers, I think also IMF's numbers, will continue to go up. We will actually hit 100% of GDP in 10 years if we don't change what we're doing. So business as usual is not an option. We have big challenges around physical infrastructure. Anybody in the Suva-Nosori corridor knows that. Around water, roads and bridges, these are things we've already talked about. But also, and the last slide I think Mr. Gaundo talked about, the huge loss of skills. And that goes straight to economic growth. The connection is just self-evident. We need billions of dollars to be environmentally compliant. I want to talk about a little bit later on about the different types of capital that we need to protect and invest in. But natural capital, our physical environment, if we're going to take it seriously and protect our environment, that involves billions of dollars in spending. So that's what we're learning. So I'm trying to summarize it in this way. We face a triple threat. High GDP, debt to GDP ratio will actually constrain our borrowing, the borrowing that we need to invest. But we must still urgently invest in physical and human capital. If not, our quality of life and our long-term economic growth is threatened. Even the assumptions that we make today about our road and bridge network surviving, about there being water in the taps, those are things that we assume will continue. Those are actually at risk unless we invest significantly. And finally, we don't have the financial headroom to respond to shocks. I think it was Mr. Narumbe who taught me that term, financial headroom. And that's actually what happened. We went from 40%, 50% of GDP. Suddenly, we've got no space left. And yet, we're still vulnerable to economic shocks. Cat 5 cyclones, we've got to get used to those. Winston cost us $500 to $600 million. We haven't had a Cat 5 cyclone hit Suva, because that would be catastrophic. And where is the money going to come from to actually cover that? And so we require investment, the investment we talked about a bit further up the slide, to improve resilience and to reduce financial impacts. So what we're learning about government assets and operations, the old adage, if you can't measure, you can't manage, and there's many challenges in measurement. Timely annual reporting is poor. Anybody who watches Parliament and listens knows that annual reports are often years, in some cases decades behind. The Office of the Auditor General is very frustrated because they can't get timely accounts. We have situations like the directors of state-owned enterprises saying, I'm not going to sign off on these accounts because they were from before my time. Well, then why are you there? Why are you on the board? Do your job. Get those accounts signed off. Get them to the Auditor General. There's no whole-of-government asset register or comprehensive maintenance program. That was a bit of a surprise to us. Everybody's doing their own thing. We've got one department with 212 properties trying to manage maintenance off an Excel spreadsheet. ADB and the World Bank have told us that our capital expenditure priorities are wrong. We have poor maintenance practices. We've been told that for every $5 we're spending on new capital expenditure, we're spending only $1 on maintenance. It should actually be, we're told, the other way around in order to lengthen the life and improve the value of our assets. We've even been told that in common with other Pacific countries, we have a build, deteriorate, rebuild model of capital expenditure. A lot of the capital expenditure that we provide as per budget is undelivered from year on year, sometimes by as much as 50%, so we've got planning and implementation issues. We have outdated public service rules. The major utilities are grant dependent. They don't control their own money. So if you're only being told every 6 months how much money you're going to get, how can you enter into long-term contracts which are likely to add greater value? Social spending, including electricity and water subsidies, is increasingly poorly targeted. You get in to a system, it's a bit like the Hotel California, you never leave. And so nobody graduates out. And that means, of course, that we are increasingly poorly targeting our spending. All right, so the World Bank PER came out. These are the headlines, and these are, please note, these are only the headlines. The report is about 180 pages long. I don't want to misrepresent the World Bank, but this is what it is telling us. It is offering us a moderate debt reduction option and an ambitious debt reduction option. I can let you read what the packages involve, but 15% VAT, zero VAT on essential items gone, lower the personal tax threshold, corporate tax, dividend withholding tax, DWT, to be added, eliminate the export incentive deduction, the EID, increase departure tax, redirect some sugar support, and cut some TELS allocations. That, they tell us, will get us to 58% of debt to GDP by 2035. Remember, that's assuming 5% average annual economic growth. There's a big assumption in that because we haven't achieved that in the last 10 years. We've been closer to 3% plus. You just heard what Permanent Secretary said about the outlook. The ambitious one is all of the above, plus some harder cuts and increases in taxation. And that would get us to 31%, but again, on the same assumptions, 5% annual economic growth. So what are we thinking? Let's start on what we're thinking. How much time have I got on how much? Okay. First of all, we think we need a national vision built around what we call these 4 capitals. Put your hand up if you know about the National Development Plan. Put your hand down if you're in the public sector. All right, put your hand up in the private sector if you contributed to the National Development Plan. If you look around, there's no hands up. And so that's the problem. We didn't contribute to the National Development Plan. We didn't contribute to the vision. We don't own it. And so we've got to revisit that. Build this vision around what I call the 4 capitals, which I won't waste time in describing, but I talked a little bit about natural capital. That's the environment. The environment's not just for us, a place to live, but it's also an economic asset for the reasons we've talked about. So what our idea is, not that debt reduction drives what we do, it's a vision that drives what we do, but we keep debt reduction in the rearview mirror because it's clearly critical. And what do they say about rearview mirrors? Objects that appear may be larger than they appear, or something like that. The social dimension is really important. Why are we doing this? There's no point doing this if we're not actually able to uplift the poorest people. And so we've still got 200,000 people in poverty. We have 96,000 people on the welfare rolls. But the targeting, again, is getting increasingly blurred. Median household income is $21,000. So in other words, that's the dividing point between the 50% who are low, 50% who are high. Human capital investment is needed now to make the next generation economically productive. We can't wait. It's what they tell us at UNFPA is the demographic dividend. We've got the bulge now. In order to make those people productive, we have to invest in their health and education now. We can't wait. We're significantly underspending and underinvesting on health, and we'll pay the price later. Education, multiple challenges. So we can't meaningfully address these challenges without more money. So this is what we're thinking. And again, headlines. What we want to do is try and, particularly around tax, drive taxation using principles. Sustainable revenue, fairness, equity, simplicity. But also certainty, predictability, and transparency. No more budget policy by ambush. We have to know well ahead of time what's happening. It has to be locked in. It has to stay locked in. So we all know and can plan, for a reasonable period of time. And so what we're saying is if the budget is in July, whatever tax measures the government chooses, because we only recommend, we don't decide, it gives us all time to adapt. So, until the 1st of January, perhaps, for the tourism industry, because 1 April is a critical, is the critical date for them. We give them until the 1st of April to adapt. But this is what we're thinking. VAT, significant increase, certainly not higher than 15%, but we also believe we should take away the zero on the basics. At 9%, FERCA tells us that's costing us $160 million a year. And of course, who benefits the most from that zero rating? It's mostly people in this room. We can afford more money. We can afford to buy more basic items, more flour, more rice, more cooking oil than the poorest people. So we're getting the benefit of that. We've got to retarget that money. That's certainly going to be our recommendation. So it's not just about increased welfare spending, but it's actually targeting those lower income households and finding a way to deliver cash back to them. In other words, making that whole process, if we are going to increase VAT, more equitable. 2 minutes, damn. Okay. Personal income tax, we want to leave pretty much as it is. I think our suggestions were sort of hitting people hard enough. Corporate tax, you can see what we're planning there. Departure tax, everybody seems to think it ought to go back over time. Okay, ease of doing business. These are two of my favorite slides. These are our ease of doing business rankings since 2008. So we've slid from 43 in 2008 to 102. We keep talking about reforming, and every time we reform our ease of doing business, we go down. We don't go up. So these are our ease of doing business rankings. This is our ease of starting a business ranking. We slid from 87 to 163. There are only 190 countries, and we're at 163. So these are the measures that we are looking at. And now we want to talk about specific targeted measures, because what we're saying is we don't want to talk about aspirations now, we want to talk about tasks. And these are the things that we're hearing about. So in the physical and capital investment space, Land Sales Act, State Lands Act, Electricity Supply, Department of Environment, Department of Town and Country Planning. Had an interesting talk to the Department of Country Planning the other day. They're actually meeting their targets, but it's everybody around them who are not. And so the delays are not so much as they appear. Business process issues, I think a lot of you in the private sector will be familiar with those. Some of these, to be honest, are not difficult fixes. They're very, very simple fixes if you get the right people into the room to sort them out. So long term, we're thinking in terms of confidence building, investment regulation and promotion, the new Investment Act. What does it do? How useful is it? I've got very strong views on that. I think we've got to completely look again at immigration. The retirement market, the market for nomads, and using foreign skills. It's about bringing the people in because they are economically useful to us, but also bringing in the skills. We've got to completely rethink that. We've got this mindset about localization, but the truth is that we don't actually have the skills. You look at New York, you look at Silicon Valley, you look at Singapore. They've got expatriates everywhere. Why? Because they're smart. They know how to use expatriate skills well for their own economic development. Courts, dispute resolution, and the wider justice system. We really have to fix up our whole dispute resolution mechanism because investors just have no confidence. Ultimately, it's the law and the courts that underpin everything. They underpin your economic rights. If they're not actually delivering results in a timely and efficient way, that's a clear disincentive to investment. I want to talk about sugar because clearly sugar is in the World Bank's sights. but everybody understands political economy, right? It's challenging. No one wins if we avoid honest dialogue about sugar. If you look at the numbers, we have been investing in the last 5 years between $45 million and $112 million of public money every year in the sugar industry. We've got deep challenges in the industry for the reasons we've set out. And at this point, we actually don't have a clear strategy for the industry, other than simply spending money to produce more cane. We're thinking about sugar, we're thinking about refined sugar, we're thinking about ethanol, cogeneration, but we've had decades to do this. We don't actually have a plan. It's ideated but not evaluated. We don't really know where the industry is going. So sugar, and one other thing, we keep underpinning all of our arguments about sugar by saying that 200,000 people depend on it. But is that actually true? We actually have to revisit that. So sugar needs a focused, urgent, strategic plan. Last slide, thanks. Turning talk into action. This is what this is about. I think these are the points I want to make. The government's approach to its own information must default to openness, and I'm very pleased that the Minister said that. Just to change the default from secrecy to openness. The new government approach is to invite engagement and collaboration, so we are actually pushing an open door now. Let's go through it. Let's actually use it. The summit creates the opportunity for better collaboration. Non-government actors, I hate that word actors, but that seems to be how we describe ourselves now. We have the opportunity to be more than bystanders now. We actually have to get into those rooms in the Ministry of Finance that the Minister has offered us and start demanding things, not just complaining and waiting for government to do something. We're good at complaining and saying nothing happens. We've got to turn our own talk into action, and we have that opportunity. Each issue that we have identified is a project, not an aspiration. Each thing that we've talked about actually needs a team to get in there and talk about it, because you have to work it out. Often there's legislation that is at the back end, there's a training plan, there's an implementation plan. Now come on, there's plenty of us in this room who are used to doing that, and we can do it. So finally, collaboration with non-government must be part of government culture. So thank you for listening, and as your reward, you get a picture of all of us. Thank you.